Thank you for joining us. Very excited about tonight. I really want to share how you can optimize not only your health, but weight loss using SlenderX and Accelerate. This is a unique product to the marketplace, and what else would you expect from RX? This is something that we are excited about here, and especially myself after spending the last 18 years helping people not only lose weight, but keep it off. And this is key as far as I'm concerned. And so what I'd like to do is to just move on and just kind of review some of the things that I guess we all are aware of, but it's really nice to review the fact, some weight control facts. First of all, about a third of our children are overweight, and 2/3 of the adults are considered to be either overweight or obese. About a third of the Americans and Canadians are on some kind of a diet at any one time, and another third are at least trying to maintain their weight. Here in the U.S., we spend nearly $30 billion each and every year on diets and weight control programs. Now, that is an amazing amount of money. But what are we getting for our time, our money, and our effort? When you look at the medical literature, we find that 2/3 of the people who lose weight on any diet, doesn't matter which one it is, will gain it back within 1 year. And if you go out 2 years, 98% of diets fail. People will gain their weight back or more. And this is an amazing statistic. So here we're spending all this time, this money and effort, and what are we really getting? 2% success rate. So why do diets not work? Well, one of the main reasons is they're a short-term solution for a long-term problem. In other words, when any patient comes into my office and say, "Oh, Dr. Strand, I'm going on such and such a diet." Now, I don't care which diet it is. If they're saying that, the connotation is that they're going to be going on a diet. Usually they're going to be coming off that diet, returning to those poor lifestyles that got them into trouble to begin with. The other reason diets fail is the majority of diets are not balanced. They're not healthy. They either eliminate all the fats, like in Dr. Ornish diet, or they eliminate most of the carbs in Atkins diet. Well, we know you can't stay on these diets for any length of time. You can't stay, they're just not healthy. But the main reason diets fail is because they don't tackle the core issue or problem, which is insulin resistance. And so I'm going to be talking to you just a little bit just to give you some idea. But I really want to focus tonight on RX's weight management system. See, RX is a scientifically based company. They understand everything that I am going to share with you tonight. They understand the science. They have developed products specifically to help you correct the underlying or root cause why someone gains weight in the beginning and is causing all the health problems that we see. And so when you look at it, it's a system. We have SlenderX Accelerate. We have cellular nutrition in the vitamins and minerals or optimals. And we can add Omega Q to that for even better results. They have a wonderful meal replacement in Pure Nourish. So I'm going to explain how this all works together and how you can optimize your health benefits and weight loss using this system. But I want to just give you just a little bit of scientific background. You see, we have thought, since carbohydrates are simply long chains of sugar, that the longer the chain of sugar, we call them complex carbohydrates, the longer it would take for the body to break those down and raise your blood sugar. But the short chain sugars, those simple sugars, would break down very quickly and raise your blood sugar. Now, most people don't realize simple sugar versus complex carbohydrates is a 1901 theory. And this is something that's been around for over 100 years. Well, in 1981, Dr. David Jenkins actually challenged this conventional wisdom and put it to the test. He literally would give participants in his clinical trials a particular carbohydrate and then measure the rise in blood sugar. He actually tested it, and he developed the concept called glycemic index. So let's just see how this works. First of all, Dr. David Jenkins would give participants a straight glucose. Now, glucose is what all these sugars turn into in our body or in our bloodstream. And he would measure that. And then he would give that a glycemic index of 100. Then he would compare every different foods, different carbohydrates, bread, rice, potatoes, fruit, apples, oranges, and in this case, sweet cherries. And so what he did is he would compare it to the rise of glucose, which was 100. He gave a glycemic index of 100. And then he would compare sweet cherries, and it would go up 22% as high. So sweet cherries had a glycemic index of 22. And this is how he would measure. So it was no guesswork. It's no theory. This was actual true testing. And so the amazing thing is when you look at various representative foods, you see glucose there has a glycemic index of 100. But look at the baked potato. It has a glycemic index of 85. Mashed potatoes is 91. All of your cereals are in the 80s. All your rices are somewhere between 80 and 90. Look at whole wheat bread. It's 71. Now, those are all complex carbohydrates. But now look at table sugar. Table sugar only had a glycemic index of 61. So here we have a glycemic index of 61. And then look at a peach, sweet cherries, black beans, very, very low glycemic. Now, you look at the glycemic index chart. I like to look at 45, 50 to be low GI, somewhere between 45 and 60, medium glycemic index, and a high glycemic index would be greater than 70. So look at here. Here you see bread, flour, rice, cereals and potatoes actually spike your blood sugar faster than if you're slapping table sugar on your tongue. Now this becomes critical when you start to realize and understand why we see what happens when you spike your blood sugar. Now, when you wake up in the morning, you have a fasting blood sugar represented by this black dashed line. So when you wake up, you start out with a certain level of a blood sugar called a fasting blood sugar. But let's say you go out and have a bagel. By the way, a white bagel has a glycemic index of 85. And let's say a cup of coffee and orange juice. Well, that blood sugar rises very rapidly. And there's two things that happen with this rapidly rising blood sugar. First of all, we know that glucose, this rapidly rising blood sugar in your bloodstream, causes irritation to the fine lining of your arteries and causes inflammation and spasm of your arteries. In fact, the medical literature shows you spike your blood sugar after having a bagel and orange juice, those arteries go into spasm for 4 to 5 hours after that meal. Now, we know that that is because that sugar in the bloodstream sets off a very high incidence of what we call free radicals. Because in these same studies, they would give patients or participants the vitamin E or vitamin C in supplementation. Then they would go have their bagel and orange juice, and their arteries would only go into spasm for 4 to 5 minutes. So we know that antioxidants actually protect against this free radical damage and irritation to your fine arteries. But the other thing that's very important to realize is the body must control blood sugar in a very narrow range because our brain thinks on blood sugar. Well, this rapidly rising blood sugar stimulates the release of insulin, which is your storage hormone. Insulin's job is to transport that sugar into the cell so it can be utilized as energy or stored as glycogen or fat. But the trouble with the rapidly rising blood sugar is that you overstimulate the release of insulin. And so what happens is that blood sugar drops almost as fast as it went up. But here's the critical thing. See how it drops below the fasting blood sugar into the low blood sugar or hypoglycemic range. Now, this stimulates the release of what we call our stress hormones, like adrenaline and cortisol, to drive that blood sugar back up to normal. Because if it were, we've all experienced this, if it gets down too low, you not only get a shaky weakness, you can get mentally confused. If it keeps going down, you can have literally a seizure or go into a coma. But what happens is these stress hormones drive the blood sugar back up to normal. But here's the problem. Now you have these high levels of stress hormones floating around in your bloodstream, which sets off an uncontrollable hunger. What the medical literature says is that you have no choice. You have to eat again. And you usually crave another high glycemic meal, and you set off this cycle, so it goes over and over again. So what we have been calling emotional eating or cravings all of these years is simply the natural hormonal response to spiking your blood sugar. And what I have learned, and I teach my patients, is the greatest drug you put in your mouth is the foods you choose to eat. Certain foods satisfy, and certain foods cause this carbohydrate addiction or these cravings. And this is critical when it comes to overeating as far as this goes. So what we do is you start to realize that studies done like Dr. Ludwig did, he took 12-year-old boys and either gave them a high glycemic breakfast, which happened to be instant oatmeal, or he gave them the same amount of calories in a low glycemic meal, which happened to be a veggie omelet and fruit. Then they said, boys, just go out and eat whatever you want the rest of the day, and they just kept track of it. And what they found is the kids that had the high glycemic meal ate 80% more calories than the children that ate the low glycemic meals. Now they switched the groups. It wasn't the children, it was the food they chose to eat. And so what you realize is that certain foods addict and certain foods satisfy. I mean, have you ever tried to go out and eat 5 apples a day at one time, or 4 bananas? You can't do it. Why? Because you're satisfied. But I'll guarantee you can't just have one Lay's potato chip. There are certain foods that addict, that increase this uncontrollable hunger, and there's others that satisfy. And this is what you need to learn, in other words, to optimize your health. Now let's just go back, now that you understand that, and let's just look at the USDA food pyramid. Now this is what the medical community is telling everybody that they should do, and this is how we need to eat to be healthy. But look at what's at the base of the food pyramid. You know, you start to look at this and you start to realize that they recommend 6 to 11 servings of bread, cereal, rice, and pasta. Now, I've just told you these are worse than sugar. Where do we put sugar? All the fats, oils, and sweets, they're up here at the top. So I'm not alone in this, but in fact, Dr. Walter Willett, the head of preventive medicine and nutrition at Harvard, said, we've got this all wrong. We have actually created the diabetes obesity epidemic by what we're teaching. The food pyramid should look like this. It should be a T. These foods should be on top. They're worse than sugars. And so for these reasons, this is why we are starting to see such a tremendous amount of obesity and diabetes in the United States. And so this is where we are. So inactivity and the all-American diet, like I've shared with you, is the reason that we are seeing people becoming less and less sensitive to their own insulin and developing insulin resistance. And this, we have to understand, is the reason we're seeing such health problems in the United States. Now, when you become less sensitive to your own insulin, you develop a problem that's called the metabolic syndrome or prediabetes. This is a constellation of problems that has been identified by Dr. Gerald Ravens, a researcher and MD at Stanford University. But when you become less sensitive to your insulin, the body compensates for that by making more insulin. And as blood insulin levels rise, you start to gain this unusual amount of weight around your middle. You develop high blood pressure. That good cholesterol or HDL starts to drop. The bad or LDL starts to go up. Triglycerides, that other fat in the blood, go up. You start to gain a lot of fat in the trunk. It leads to sleep apnea, and you're at very high risk to developing both heart disease and diabetes. And this is the problem. And it's not just something that a few of us have. The Journal of American Medical Association showed that 25% of the adults today in the U.S. and Canada already have full-blown metabolic syndrome. But see, you just don't wake up one day and have this. There's another 25% of the adults, and about 30% of our children have this problem. They're on their way to developing the metabolic syndrome. This has led the Center for Disease Control to project that this generation, starting from about the year 2000, this generation, a third of them will develop diabetes sometime in their lifetime. If they happen to be black or Hispanic, it's going to be nearly 50%. So let's just look at this very carefully. This graph was brought in to me by one of the pharmaceutical reps that has a drug called Avandia. And this graph is about 25 years, but you could go back here another 5 years because it's usually about 8-10 years of poor lifestyles, inactivity, eating the all-American diet. 80 to 90% of the carbohydrates have been shown in the U.S. that we're consuming by both adults and children are high glycemic. Well, eventually you just develop, insulin resistance, and as insulin resistance go up, the body compensates for that by increasing insulin production, as shown here by the green line. But as long as these two lines parallel, your blood sugars remain normal. Now here's the problem. You start back here, this is when your arteries begin aging about a third faster than they should. But after about 10, 12 years, the body just can't keep putting out that much insulin, so insulin production finally begins to fall, and then whoops, there goes your blood sugar, and it starts to rise, and here's where you become diabetic. The problem is this is about the time we as a physician would diagnose you as being diabetic. The trouble is, by the time we diagnose you as being diabetic, 60% of our patients already have major cardiovascular disease. That is why 80% of our diabetics are dying today prematurely of what we call a cardiovascular event, like a heart attack or a stroke. Now that was true back in 1970. It is true today. All of the drugs, all of the treatment has not changed this one bit. That's why the American Association of Endocrinology is saying, hey, we got to be treating this metabolic syndrome or prediabetes as aggressively as we do diabetes. And how and what do they recommend we do? They recommend that we do this by actually promoting intensive lifestyle changes. That is RX's weight management system. We literally are giving you the answer for the diabetes obesity epidemic. And so when you look at this, why in the world do we gain so much weight? Well, when you tip over into this abnormal metabolic state, and it is abnormal, you can't utilize calories normally. Because the muscle, which normally takes up 85 to 90% of all calories from any meal or snack, no longer can get that much calories in because of their insulin resistant. They're not responding to insulin as like they used to. So now many of the calories that used to be utilized as energy are being diverted to the fat cells of the abdomen. And one of the other jobs insulin has is to convert that glucose, store it as fat, in the fat cells of the abdomen, and then block the release of that fat. That's why people that develop insulin resistance hold on to fat like a sponge holds on to water. They just have a resistance to weight loss. And the older we get, the harder it is to lose weight, and that's why we can't lose weight effectively. What I learned in my medical practice in the middle 1990s was the fact if I could not reverse insulin resistance and tip them back into a normal metabolic state, I couldn't help my patients effectively lose weight. So here's RX's weight loss system. It's a 4-part comprehensive lifestyle program. It is not a diet. RX, why would they want to develop, and why would we want to develop another diet program that's going to fail 98% of the time? That was not their goal. They understand this. They understand the benefit of lifestyles. So RX's SlenderX plus Accelerate is key, but it needs to be combined with a healthy diet, one that does not spike your blood sugar, and I'll share this with you. You need to have cellular nutrition provided at least by the RX Optimals, and I always recommend ideally adding Omega Q to the Optimals, and you need to have modest exercise. That's the system. So let's go through each of these individually. SlenderX and Accelerate, and SlenderX is a homeopathic drug. It contains 10 different homeopathic ingredients. Now, about 6 of these actually increase fat release from your fat cells by improving insulin sensitivity, in my opinion. This is what I'm seeing in my patients. And I can just show you when I look at their blood work, I look at the parameters, I see this, and it accelerates this. There are other homeopathic ingredients that help suppress your appetite, and others increase your metabolism. It's a wonderful, unique product that RX has brought to the marketplace that no one else has. Now, they've added Accelerate, which contain high doses of very potent vitamin B12 for increased energy and metabolism, along with the nutrient biotin and some Ayurvedic herbs, which actually have come from India, which are calming. They allow you to be more calm and relaxed during, any stressful time when you're trying to challenge weight loss and you're trying to work through this. But they are wonderful, unique products. However, if you use them just by themselves, you are not going to have as much success as you start to understand the keys that you need to do to have optimal weight loss using SlenderX and Accelerate. First of all, we need to be eating a low glycemic diet of 1,250 calories per day. Now, that is key. Now, it's not just eating 1,250 calories. It needs to be low glycemic. Obviously, we need to be drinking plenty of purified water. Here comes Purity water bottle. Have it with you. I recommend 6 to 8 ounces, 8 to 10 ounce a day, glasses a day, or probably about 4 Purity water bottles. It's key. But then I recommend adding the RX Optimals, and I'll share that why I do that, and Omega Q. But we also have Pure Nourish, wonderful meal replacements that allow you to affect your behavior and get you out of your normal eating routine, and I'll explain how that is key. But we also need to be exercising. Now, you don't have to be a superstar. You don't have to be a marathon runner. Simply walking briskly, 30 minutes, 5 times a week. But now here's what I teach my patients and why I know I get very good results, is I have them also avoid all breads, flour, rice, cereals, potatoes, and sugar. Now, why? Those are the enemies, processed grains and the almighty white potato. So these are key. Now, I've also developed my online 12-week basic Healthy for Life program, which is really a behavioral modification program. And it's there for those who want to use it. But I'll tell you, when you put all this together, you give yourself the absolute best chance for success. Now, my behavior modification program is located at healthconceptsint.com and /RX to get any special discounts. So it's a 4-part comprehensive lifestyle program. It's SlenderX Accelerate, a healthy diet, one that does not spike your blood sugar, modest exercise, and the optimals. So let's talk about diet first. Now, we have shown you what happens when you have a high glycemic meal, but what happens when you have a low glycemic meal? Well, look at, you start out fasting again, but the blood sugar rises very slowly. Well, the first thing you can see is the fact that you're not going to have that inflammation and spasm of your arteries because you're not spiking it so high. So you get rid of that inflammation right away. But also, since the blood sugar rises very slowly, you're not going to overstimulate the release of insulin. And so what happens is that you will not, the blood sugar, yes, it'll drop down back to the fasting blood sugar, but will not go down into this hypoglycemic range. In fact, some medical literature shows you have one meal, or like a Pure Nourish, just one meal, your insulin levels will begin to drop and your glucagon, that fat releasing hormone, starts to come up. And so, yeah, when you're hungry, you just eat again. But your natural appetite will come down. So this matches the SlenderX that's suppressing your appetite, but then you start to eat a low glycemic meal, and that helps suppress your appetite. In fact, many people get into this after a week or two. They have trouble eating the 1,250 calories. So this is key when we start to realize how this works. So the next thing is, look at Pure Nourish, folks. You know, if you take Pure Nourish, it is low glycemic, it is gluten-free, soy-free, dairy-free. It has probiotics and beneficial enzymes. But the other thing is, I have my patients take 2 scoops and put it in water, almond milk or coconut milk, along with some fresh frozen or some frozen fruit or fresh fruit 2 times a day. Now, when you do that, it's only about 230 to 250 calories per meal. And you immediately get yourself out of this normal eating habits that you're in. It's a great behavioral modification tool. And it allows you to easily experience a healthy diet that does not spike your blood sugar. People, you'll get hooked on these. They're wonderful. It's a wonderful product. And it makes life easy. And this is part of your food budget. It's only $2.75 to $3 to put a meal like this together. So it's really key in helping you. So you can have one for breakfast, maybe one for lunch, and then sit down and have a nice low glycemic meal with your family and have 2 low glycemic snacks during the day. Eating small, frequent meals is key. Now, what do we mean by exercise? I told you, just if you've been out of shape, slowly build up, but we want you to get to about 30 minutes of modest aerobic activity 5 days a week. Now, the only thing the body can't handle is inactivity. So, but it could be brisk walking, bike riding, swimming, hiking, tennis, racquetball. It does not matter. Just anything that gets the body moving. But what we find is that when you do aerobic exercise, you become much more sensitive to your insulin from a different mechanism. And that is key. So aerobic activity is key to improving insulin sensitivity. But when I was researching the medical literature, I also saw studies after study that show certain minerals like vanadium, chromium, magnesium, selenium, vitamin E, vitamin C, and even grapeseed extract, all of these antioxidants improve insulin sensitivity from a different mechanism. So it is key that anybody who wants to optimize their weight loss using SlenderX and Accelerate should be taking cellular nutrition, which I believe is at least the optimals. Now, I would say ideally doing the optimals in Omega Q, especially if you're having trouble with maybe a little bit elevated cholesterol or triglycerides or anything like that. This would be ideal. So that is key. Now, I'm just going to share just briefly the Healthy for Life program. You know, when I started to do this in my office, the hardest thing a physician has is to try to change and help people change their behavior. And so I learned that it's key for people to be taken by the hand and guided into these. So we evaluate you, educate you, motivate you, and hold you accountable, and then document your improvement. So every time you log on, you get daily lifestyle tips. I have a video educational series where my video series, it's a nutritional course that you will not get anywhere else. We have 15 trainings. And in fact, the first training is how to optimize weight loss using RX's SlenderX. It's a wonderful training that's now up. I actually have resources where I have actually evaluated over 1,400 different foods, showing whether they're low, medium, or high, and how to stay in the low foods. And it's a database you can look up. It tells you the calories. I evaluate foods for glycemic index, glycemic load, and quality. We have recipes, we have menus, and you then also get a self-graded lifestyle journal. One thing I've learned, if you write down how you're exercising, how you're taking your RX supplements, how you're eating, the fluid intake, you're taking subconscious lifestyle habits and making them conscious, and that's key. And all of a sudden you can deal with it. I find that if people do not journal, we get about a 10 to 15% success rate. But if they journal, I'm seeing over 85% success rate with this. And the other thing is we are able to affect lifestyles. They become lifestyle change. Now, my online medical program has been involved in 3 major clinical trials under what we call an IRB, Institutional Review Board, which is under the guidelines of the FDA. And in 12 weeks, people, now this is not without SlenderX or Accelerate, but this is just diet, exercise, and supplementation. They lost 13 to 15 pounds. The BMI dropped, the body mass index, 2.5 points, but the weight loss came from around the waist, losing 2.5 inches. Blood pressure decreased by 10 points. Total cholesterol decreased on an average of 17%. That's amazing. Those are drug levels. LDL cholesterol decreased 19%. Triglycerides decreased by 27%. But why did this all happen? Well, the blood insulin levels, remember I showed you the slide and I'll show you again. The blood insulin levels go up, but when you start to improve insulin sensitivity, they drop. In all the clinical trials, blood insulin levels dropped approximately 50%. Now, this is just one example of what I see in my office. Ryan came into my office, started a year ago on SlenderX, Accelerate, the program on exactly as I laid it. This was his blood work. He was really pre-diabetic, and I'll tell you the reason I know. His blood sugars are up, cholesterol, but look at his triglyceride here. His triglyceride was actually 235. HDL, the cholesterol was low. Anytime a male gets below 40, they're developing insulin resistance. But I have learned the worse they get, I divide their triglycerides by the HDL, and I get a ratio of 6.18. Whenever this gets above 2, and you can look at your lipid profile just if you want to check yourself, and you can see that this goes up. So he definitely had insulin resistance. He was pre-diabetic. But look at where he was after just 3 months. He lost 53 pounds. But his blood sugar stayed about the same. It hadn't gone up. But look at his cholesterol drop. But look at his triglycerides drop from 235 down to 74. But here's what's even exciting. Look at his HDL went up over 25%. That is amazing, folks. And LDL stayed about there. The VLDL, or the very bad cholesterol, dropped dramatically. But look at his ratio. He dropped below 2. He literally tipped back into this normal metabolic state that we call insulin resistance. So that is key. So what we find is that RX's weight management system allows you to have rapid weight loss by using SlenderX and Accelerate drops. Now, everybody loves rapid weight loss, but when you combine a low glycemic diet, exercise, the optimals, and Pure Nourish, Purity Water, it allows you the best opportunity to literally correct the underlying problem, which is insulin resistance, and begin releasing this fat. So what I want to share with you is that what I see in my practice over and over again is I get people here, and even people who are diabetic, I tell my diabetic patients it takes 18 to 24 months of being on these lifestyle changes to really to get optimal improvement. But everybody where we can catch earlier, you can literally tip them back within 12 weeks, just like I showed you Ryan. So this is what's key. But as you improve insulin sensitivity, blood insulin levels begin to drop, and your blood pressure comes down. Your cholesterol, triglycerides come down. You begin releasing fat, and this is what's so great about RX's weight management system. It is not just about weight loss, but it's also about your health. So that is what you need to understand. This is key. And I'll tell you, we're going to see story after story after story. I'm working now with 2 people whose BMIs are over 55. I have one on this program with SlenderX Accelerate. He's out 2 months now. He's lost 55 pounds. I'm working with another one who is just over 300 pounds. He's down 35 pounds in just 6 weeks. We're just going to see so much amazing testimonials with this system. But what's exciting to me is RX's weight management system is not a diet. It's a lifestyle. Why is that important? Why would you want to lose weight just to gain it back? I mean, I have patients come in, I was on such and diet, this diet, but you know, Dr. Strand, I kept that off for a year and a half. And I tell them, no, you didn't keep it off for a year and a half, just a year and a half to gain it back. See, weight loss is great. I don't go against that. But however, keeping it off is priceless. That's what RX is offering you with their weight management system. This is what's key. Now, if